أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين المنتخبين الصديقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والاسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردبية والجود الثقبية والنقاوة النقبية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وجعلنا منهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا لما صبروا وكانوا بآياتنا يوقنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Imam Zaynul Abedeen in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zaynul Abedeen, born on the 5th of Sha'ban in the 38th year after Hijrah, and martyred on the 25th of Muharram in either the 94th or the 95th year after Hijrah. This makes the duration of his life either 56 or 57 years, and it makes the duration of his imamah 33 or 34 years. You see, when it comes to the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, one feature of his life which comes out at the forefront is that the duration of his imamah was significantly longer when you compare it to some of the other imams. For example, when you look at Imam Hassan al-Askari, Imam al-Askari's father passes away when the imam is 22. And the imam is martyred at the age of 28. Over there, when it comes to the latter imams, we see an imam whose duration of imamat is just 6 years. But when it comes to the life of Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zaynul Abedeen, we find that 33 or 34 years is the duration of his imamat. And this duration obviously came after the event of Karbala. Now the question that we need to ask is that what do we know about the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen after Karbala? That if this individual lives for 34 years after this event, then naturally there must be a legacy which he leaves behind. There must be teachings which he leaves behind. And that's why the subject of analysis tonight, on this day where we celebrate the birth of the Imam, is to examine the biography of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. Now, when we look at the biography of Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, we find that there is one verse of the Quran which really describes the life of the Imam. And that verse is the famous verse in chapter 32, verse 24. And it says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. It says that from amongst mankind, we have made imams and leaders who guide by our command. You see, what makes this ayat and this verse of the Quran particularly unique is that this is the only verse of the Quran where Allah mentions what his criteria for an imam and a leader is. Other verses of the Quran, they'll mention the qualities of an imam. They'll mention the sifat and the attributes of the imam. But this is the only place in the Quran where Allah is giving the reason as to why I have made them imams. And he says that we have made from amongst them imams who guide by our command, لَمَّا صَبَرُوا وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ. That the reason we have made them imams is number one, that they were patient, and number two, they had certainty within our signs. You see, this ayat, it summarizes the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. Because when you look in this ayat, there are three features that are mentioned. Number one is the feature of hidayat and guidance. And the Imam, he guides. The second feature is patience and sabr. And the third feature is certainty and in the signs of God. These three features, they manifest in three specific areas in the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. The certainty of the Imam manifests in the ibadat and the worship of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. The sabr and the patience of the Imam manifests in him propagating the message of Karbala, and you find his hidayat, it manifests within his du'as and his teachings. Now, when we come to each of these stages, we'll look at what each of these different things mean. Now, as I said earlier, Imam Zaynul Abedeen is born on the 5th of Sha'ban, in the 38th year after Hijrah. And the Imam is martyred on the 25th of Muharram in the 95th year after Hijrah. What this means is that 2 years of his life he spends with his grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. And what this means is that on the day of Ashura, the Imam was merely 22 years old. Now for an individual who was at the age of 22, which is a relatively young age, for him to face that sort of difficulty that he saw on the day of Ashura, you find it naturally has an impact upon his personality. You see, this is that personality. On one side, the father of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, each of you know Imam al-Hussein. You know, there's one incident which is stated that one day when Imam Zaynul Abedeen was young, he had become ill. And when he had become ill, Imam al-Hussein, he says to Imam Zaynul Abedeen that, oh my son, is there any help that you need? Imam Zaynul Abedeen replies to his father at the age of childhood that, oh father, the only one who can help me is Allah. In this regards, Imam al-Hussein says to Imam Zaynul Abedeen that you are like the Prophet Ibrahim. He says, what do you mean? In what sense? He says in the sense that when Ibrahim was thrown in the fire, and Jibreel comes and he says, oh Ibrahim, do you need any help? Ibrahim replied by saying that, oh Jibreel, it is only Allah who can help me. It is no help that I need from you. In that sense, O Sajjad, you have that same spirit within you. So you find on one side, the father of Imam Zaynul Abedeen needs no introduction. But the question is that who was the mother of Imam Zaynul Abedeen? You see, the mother of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, when you look at our riwayat and our narrations, the name which is given for her is Shah Zanan. And that name has a Persian origin. When we look at the historical records, what they mention is that the mother of Imam Zaynul Abedeen was the daughter of the last Sassanid or Persian king by the name of Yazdegerd III or Yazdejurd. And in that sense, after you find the Persian land was conquered and the Islamic conquest had happened, you find that the daughters of this king were sent towards the Arabian lands. Muhammad bin Abi Bakr marries off one of the daughters, and you find Imam al-Hussein marries the other daughter who would give birth to Imam Zaynul Abedeen. But you find that the mother of Imam Zaynul Abedeen would pass away shortly after giving birth towards the Imam. So in this sense, you find that Imam Zaynul Abedeen was raised by Sayyid al-Shuhada. So you find this is the first aspect of the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. Now when we come towards the second aspect of the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, the question is that what did Imam Zaynul Abedeen accomplish after Karbala? You know, naturally we know about the events of the day of Ashura from Majalis. But the question is that what was his legacy after this event? At the first level, we find that his legacy is seen by his title Zaynul Abedeen, that this individual is the adornment of the worshippers. You know, the act of ibadah and worship is so important that Allah in the Quran has tied the reason of our creation with the act of ibadah. And there is only one verse of the Quran which speaks about our reason of creation as clearly as that ayat. And in that ayat it says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I have not created the jinn and the human being except to worship me. Now this worship has different forms. Yes, to serve the creation of Allah is worship. And our canonical ibadah is worship. And to gain ma'rifat of Allah is worship. You see, the most you and I can do in this journey of our creation is that we can follow the command of the ayat and we can become abid and we can become worshippers. But there is one status that an individual reaches, and that is the status of being Zaynul Abedeen, and that is something which we cannot reach. Because this title of the Imam was a title which was given by Allah towards Imam Zaynul Abedeen. And this, it represents the certainty of the Imam. You see, there's an ayat of the Quran which speaks about the reality of worship. And it shows that if a person truly worships Allah, this means that he has yaqeen and certainty in Allah. And that is that verse of the Quran that says, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, that, O mankind, worship Allah until death comes or until certainty comes. You know, on one side the Mufassirun said that yaqeen over here means death. And the reason it means death is at the moment of death, everybody is certain. The mu'min is certain that the path of Allah was right, and the atheist is certain that that path he took was the path which was incorrect. But over here, that individual who has certainty, you find that individual is the one who truly worships Allah. You know, it's stated that one day an individual comes to Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. When they come to Imam al-Baqir, they say, "Oh, Muhammad al-Baqir, we've seen something strange." Imam al-Baqir says, "What have you seen?" The man says that I saw your father Zaynul Abedeen in worship. And he says to him that what is strange about that? He replies by saying that when your father would stand up for worship, he would stand so straight that only the clothes on his body were moving. And there would be sweat which is dripping from his forehead. And the color upon his face was changing. What is this condition of your father? You know what Imam al-Baqir says? Imam al-Baqir says, the reason my father stands in this manner is because he recognizes the one whom he is standing before. That he recognizes Allah, the grandeur of Allah, so he stands within this manner. You see, when this title is given to him of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, there are areas in his life which demonstrate why he was worthy of this title. You know, one day it's stated that Imam Zaynul Abedeen looked very tired. And Imam al-Baqir, he comes towards his father and he sees him and he begins to cry. And he says, "Oh father, why is it that you go through all of this effort in the worship of God?" Imam Zaynul Abedeen says, "Oh my son, go and bring me that scroll which is within my room." When Imam al-Baqir, he brings that scroll towards of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he opens the scroll and he says, "Oh my son, this was the ibadat of my grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib." And he says, "Who can worship like my grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen? What I am doing doesn't even come close towards his ibadah." You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen was that individual that when they asked him about the reality of God, that when he would worship Allah, he said, "Lo kushifa liyal ghita ma azdattu yaqina." That if the veils were removed from me, it wouldn't increase my certainty in any bit. Meaning that what is veiled from other individuals, I had that certainty as if it was unveiled for other individuals, that it wouldn't increase me any bit. So you find this is something which continues in the seerah of Imam Zaynul Abedeen at the first level. Now the second level of the biography of Imam Zaynul Abedeen that we see is that sabr and patience, it manifests in the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. And that sabr is seen in him propagating the message of Karbala. You know, it's very famous that when Imam Zaynul Abedeen would be in Medina, he would remind individuals of the musibah of his father Imam al-Hussein. That one day he would see a butcher, and he would say to that butcher that, did you give water towards this animal? And did you give food towards this animal? And did you sharpen the sword? The butcher would say that we are Muslims. Of course we gave water to the animal, and we fed the animal, and we sharpened the sword. The Imam would reply by saying, Qutila abi adshana, that my father was killed thirsty. And my father wasn't given food, and neither did they sharpen the sword. Now one day the Imam is in Medina. A man, he comes up and he says, Ana al-gharib, that I am alone. Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he looks at that man and he says, oh man, if you were to die, would they put a shroud and a kafan upon your body? Would they bury you? Would they give ghusl towards you? The man says, yes. Imam Zaynul Abedeen says that if anyone was gharib, it was my father Hussein who was gharib. You see, why would the Imam do this? Yes, at one level, the emotional difficulty of Karbala is very difficult. The shiddats of Karbala was there with the Imam. But at the second level, there is a higher dimension to this. And that higher dimension is that the Imam is propagating the message of his father, that message of the deen of Islam, which goes through that martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. You see, if there was a child in this room who was crying, people will ask that, why is that child crying? But if that child was laughing, nobody is going to ask that, why is the child laughing and smiling? In the same way, when Imam Zaynul Abedeen would cry, when he would remind people of his grandfather Imam al-Hussein, it was an opportunity to mention what the message of his grandfather Imam al-Hussein was. You know, unfortunately, many of us, when we think of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, the picture which is painted is of a weak individual or an emotional individual, na'udhu billah. But no, this is that Imam who carried out jihad and struggling in the way of God in the most complete of manners. You see, jihad is not only a struggle with the sword, but it is also a struggle with your character as well. You know, one day Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he's in Medina. A man comes up and he says that I need water. Imam Zaynul Abedeen gives water towards that man. Afterwards, the companions of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, they come. They say, oh Ali ibn al-Hussein, do you not know who you just gave water to? Imam Zaynul Abedeen says what he did was of his character. And this water which I gave towards him was of my character. You know who that individual was? That individual was Hussein ibn Numayr or Hassin ibn Numayr. One of the individuals who was involved in the killing of Ali Akbar, the brother of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. Imagine in what manner Imam Zaynul Abedeen struggles. That on one level he struggles with his character. But at the second level, you find that Imam Zaynul Abedeen was vocal in the most difficult situations. You know, there's a famous expression in the Arabic language that one of the most difficult things an individual can do is kalimatul haq in the sultan al-jair. That for a person to speak the truth in front of an oppressive leader is something which is very difficult for an individual to do. Because you are valuing truth over your life, over your family, over your property. And this is something which Imam Zaynul Abedeen did time and time after Karbala. You know, when Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he goes into the court of Ibn Ziyad in Kufa. One thing which Ibn Ziyad, he says, Masmuka, that what's your name? The Imam says, my name is Ali ibn al-Hussein. You know what Ibn Ziyad replies by saying? He says, Alaysa Allahu qatala Ali ibn al-Hussein? Ibn Ziyad says that didn't Allah kill Ali ibn al-Hussein already? Meaning that when he says Ali ibn al-Hussein, did Ali Akbar not get killed already, the brother of Imam Zaynul Abedeen? You know what the Imam replies by saying? He says, La, bal qatalahu nas. It wasn't Allah who was the killer of Ali ibn al-Hussein, but rather the people had killed him. Then after that, Ibn Ziyad repeats, he says, Bal qatalahu Allah. But rather it was Allah who killed him. At that moment, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, he speaks out, and Ibn Ziyad says that assassinate this man. You know what Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he says? He says, Abil maut tuhaddiduni? That do you threaten me with death? Inna al-qatla lana aada. That it is our habit of Ahlul Bayt to be killed. Wa karamatana min Allahi ash-shahada. And our honor from Allah is martyrdom and shahada. You see, in this manner, when the haqq of Ahlul Bayt was not known towards those people to speak in the face of death, this was the jihad of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. And this is just one example. You know, another example is that when they enter Sham, there were many individuals in Sham, in Damascus, in the Levant, who didn't know that this was Ahlul Bayt. One man, he comes up to Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he says that may Allah destroy you, that you individuals are bughat and rebels. You know what Imam Zaynul Abedeen says? He says, Ya Shaykh, hal qara'at al-Quran? That have you ever read the Quran? The man says, yes, I've read the Quran. Imam Zaynul Abedeen says that have you read the verse of the Quran? قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَةِ. That, O Prophet, say, I ask for nothing except love for my progeny. The man says, yes, I've read the verse. The Imam says, نَحْنُ الْقُرْبَةِ, we are that family. After that, he says, oh man, have you read the verse of the Quran? وَآتِ دِل قُرْبَ حَقَّهُ, that give the right towards your kinfolks. The man says, yes. The Imam says, نَحْنُ الْقُرْبَةِ, we are those kinfolks. Then after that, he says, oh man, have you read the verse of Khums? And he says, yes. He says, we are mentioned within that verse. And then he says, have you read the verse of the Quran? إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلِ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا.
Allahumma salli ala.
That we have purified you, O Ahlul Bayt, from all impurities. The Imam says that we are that Ahlul Bayt. The man, he says that I did not know. You see, in this manner, Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he speaks. And then after that, Imam Zaynul Abedeen, when he goes into the court in Sham, even before he gives his famous sermon, it's said that a man was upon the pulpit, he was praising Yazid and Muawiyah. You know what Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he says? He says that, do you give me permission hatta as'ada hadhil a'wad? That do you give me permission to climb the structure of wood and speak, O Yazid? You see, Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he doesn't call it a mimbar and a pulpit. Because for something to be a mimbar, haqq and truth has to be spoken from there. And for something to be a mimbar, because a mimbar is what Rasulullah would sit upon. For that to be a mimbar, the fadail of Ahlul Bayt have to be spoken there. And you find Imam Zaynul Abedeen, when he speaks to Yazid, when he shows what his struggle is, he says that, do you give me permission to climb this structure of wood, O Yazid? And in that manner, he goes and he gives his famous sermon. So you find from the seerah of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, yes, and one aspect, the ibadat of Imam Zaynul Abedeen was there. But this doesn't mean that Imam Zaynul Abedeen ignored the social function of a human being. And that function which involves others to know the truth, as the verse of the Quran says, وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, that the believers are those individuals who give wasiyah, they remind each other of the truth. This is the second level. But now at the third level, the third legacy of Imam Zaynul Abedeen is the teaching which Imam Zaynul Abedeen left behind. You see, when we look in the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, we do not find long sermons of Imam Zaynul Abedeen like we find of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Because after the day of Ashura, you find it wasn't an easy situation for Ahlul Bayt. that Ahlul Bayt would be under watch. Ahlul Bayt would face restrictions. So what did Imam Zaynul Abedeen do? Imam Zaynul Abedeen posed a dilemma for the government of that time. And that dilemma was this, is that outwardly they claimed to be Muslims. A Muslim cannot stop another Muslim from reciting dua. So Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he would raise his hand in dua, but in each of these duas, all of the teachings of Islam would be found in these duas. That anyone who wants to know Tawheed, the first dua of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah is there. And if anyone wants to know the Malaika and what the role of the angels are, the third dua of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah is there. And if anyone wants to know the character of Rasulullah, dua Makarimul Akhlaq is there. If anyone wants to know that how do you live your life in hardship, that famous dua number 7 of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah is there. You see, each of these duas which we spend a lifetime reflecting upon, Imam Zaynul Abedeen, off the top of his head, he would speak to Allah and these duas would come. You know, the status of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah is such a status that many of you recognize the value of Nahjul Balagha. Without a doubt, our deen is Quran, Nahjul Balagha. But you know what the difference between Nahjul Balagha and As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah is? Nahjul Balagha was compiled by Sayyid al-Radi. And Sayyid al-Radi was a great alim, no doubt. But who compiled As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah? As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah wasn't compiled by any alim in the worldly sense. But it was the Imam himself who compiled As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah. That each of these duas, on one side he would give it to his son Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. And on the other side he would give it to his son Zayd al-Shaheed. Zayd would give it towards his son, Imam al-Baqir would pass it to Imam al-Sadiq. And in this manner, Imam Zaynul Abedeen would speak and his children would dictate the duas of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah. You know, there was a famous scholar in Al-Zahra, and he passed away in the late 90s, and his name was Jawhari At-Tantawi. Anyone who's familiar with Islamic studies knows the name of At-Tantawi because he was a very famous mufassir and commentator of the Quran in Al-Azhar. You know, it's stated that Ayatollah Marashi Najafi, he sent a copy of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah to At-Tantawi. When At-Tantawi, he receives this copy of As-Sahifatu Sajjadiyah, he says that I have received that book of duas from Zaynul Abedeen, Imam al-Zahidi. And then after that, he says, Min ash-shaqa, that it is our own misery. Anna ilal-an, that until today, lam nakif ala hadha al-athar al-qayyim al-khalid, that we have not seen such a book, la min mawarit al-nubuwa wa la min turati ahl al-bayt, that we have not seen such a book from amongst the legacy of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. And then he says, فَكُلَّمَا تَأَمَّلْتُهَا وَجَدْتُهَا فَوْقَ كَلَامِ الْبَشَرِ وَتَحْتَ كَلَامِ الْخَالِقِ. He says that every time I reflect upon the duas of this book, I find this book to be greater than the words of the creation, but less than the words of the Creator. You see, this is Imam Zaynul Abedeen. You see, there is a hadith in our narrations from Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where the Prophet of God, he says that ad-dua mukhul ibadah, that the essence of one's ibadah is dua. And you know why it's that essence of ibadah? You know, every other act of ibadah is structured, it's formalized. You know, you can't recite salat in any way that you want to recite. That you have to face the qibla. You can't say, I'll face another direction. Or today I won't make wudu. Or today I'll recite 3 surahs instead of 2 in each unit. But when it comes to dua, dua doesn't have a formal structure. Yes, there are recommendations that begin with salawat, end with salawat, begin with the name of Allah, make dua for others. But at its essence, dua, it means to call upon Allah. And the core of our relationship with Allah is to call, to speak towards Him. That's why there's one tradition where Allah, He says to Musa that, O Musa, Salni kullama tahtaju ilayh. That, O Musa, whatever you need, ask from me. Hatta milha ajinik, even to the extent that if you need salt for your bread, salt for the dough of your bread, ask from me. So you find in that sense, dua is the essence of one's ibadah. And Imam Zaynul Abedeen showed dua in a manner which is incomparable towards anyone else within his time period. And we find this within the legacy of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. Now there's many other things that we see in the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen as well, where he would give and he would disseminate his teachings. For example, one key feature and act that Imam Zaynul Abedeen emphasized within his life was to train and to free those who were slaves within that society. You know, the issue of slavery is a very difficult issue to challenge. You know, one of the greatest crises in modern America was after the emancipation of the slaves. Because after they were emancipated, there was no social structure for them. Imagine, you have a population of 1 million individuals who are told to go. Now they're going to say, where are we to go? That they need health care, they need people to take care of them. So what Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam they would do is that before they would free these different slaves into society, they would train them. They would give them life skills. They would teach them the deen and the religion to the extent that these individuals would want to stay in the house of Ahlul Bayt. You know, one day it stated that one of the servants of Imam Zaynul Abedeen spills hot water on Imam Zaynul. That boiling water he spills on the Imam. At that point, the servant says, وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ. That the believers are those who swallow their anger. The Imam says, I swallowed my anger. وَعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. And they do good towards mankind. The Imam says that you are free in the way of Allah. You see, in this manner, the Imam, he gives tarbiyah. In another incident, if you want to see how the Imam would elevate them, it's stated that there was a drought in Medina, and this has been recorded in many historical sources, Shia and non-Shia, that there was a drought in Medina. And the people of Medina, they decided that we'll recite Salatul Istisqa. Salatul Istisqa is that it's a special prayer for rain to come down. It stated that as we were reciting this prayer, rain wasn't coming. One man, he says, that I noticed an individual came. The moment that individual came, he raised his hands in dua and rain it began to fall. So he says that I followed that man. And as I followed that man had returned to the house of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. So I knocked upon the door. And I said, O Yabna Rasulullah, O grandson of the Prophet, I want to purchase one of your slaves. The Imam says, very well. All of them come out. The man says, no, the one that I want to purchase isn't over here. The Imam says, this is that servant who Allah answers his du'as. When he came out, it stated that that man says that I want to purchase you. You know what happens at that moment? That servant, he faints and he falls on the ground. And after he wakes up, he says that I had promised that as long as I am alive, I have made dua to Allah that I would spend my life in the house of Zaynul Abedeen. You see, this is Imam Zaynul Abedeen. That whether they were with him or against him, they recognized his greatness. And that's why one of the most famous incidents in the life of Imam Zaynul Abedeen is when the caliph of that time, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, he goes towards the Kaaba. It's stated as Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, he is over there and he's looking towards the Kaaba. He wants to go and touch Al-Hajar al-Aswad. As he goes, people, they don't pay attention to him. That the rush was so much, he's not able to enter. So he decides that I'm going to sit on the side and I'll watch the people doing tawaf. As he's watching the people doing tawaf, he notices that one man he comes. And when that man, he goes to the Kaaba, in the way the Nile had split for Musa, the people, they split for that man. And he walks in between the crowd and Imam Zaynul Abedeen, he goes and he kisses Hajar al-Aswad. You know, the guards of Hisham bin Abdul Malik, they were watching. And they said to Hisham, Man hada, that who is this? Hisham ibn Abdul Malik says, I don't know who that is. At that moment, it stated that the famous Arabic poet by the name of Al-Farazdak was there. The moment Farazdak, he hears that Hisham ibn Abdul Malik says, I don't know who Imam Zaynul Abedeen is, Al-Farazdak gives one of the most famous qasida and odes in the history of the Arabic language. And you know what he says? He says, هَذَا الَّذِي تَعْرِفُ الْبَطْحَاءُ وَتْأَتَهُ وَالْبَيْتُ يَعْرِفُهُ وَالْحِلُّ وَالْحَرَمُ. He says, oh Hisham, you say that you don't know who Imam Zaynul Abedeen is. The land of Makkah knows the footsteps of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. And the Kaaba recognizes Imam Zaynul Abedeen. In the Haram, outside the Haram, all of these lands, they recognize him. هذا ابن خير عباد الله كلهم هذا التقي النقي طاهر العلم بجده أنبياء الله قد ختموا وليس قولك من هذا بدائره الأرب تعرف من أنكرت والعجم. You know what he says? He says this is the son of Allah's greatest creation. This is the one who is pure and immaculate, the one who is the guide. وَلَيْسَ قَوْلُكَ مَنْ حَادَ بِضَائِرِهِ. You saying that you don't know him doesn't bring any harm upon him. Because the Arabs and the non-Arabs, they recognize who he is. بِجَدِّهِ أَنْبِيَاءَ اللَّهِ قَدْ قُتِمُوا وَلَيْسَ قَوْلُكَ مَنْ حَادَ بِضَائِرِهِ الْأُرْبُ تَعْرِفُ مَنْ أَنْكَرْتَ وَالْعَجَمُ كِلْتَ يَدَيْهِ غِيَاطٌ أَمَّ نَفْعُهُمَا. He says that this is that man that both of his hands are like the cloud which gives rain. When the cloud, it gives rain, it brings benefit to everyone. It doesn't look that who is a believer, who is a non-believer. In the way, this is that Imam that when he benefits everyone. يُسْتَوْكَفَانِ وَلَا يَأْرُوهُمَ عَدَمُ. That both of his hands are never denying anyone, that they do not say no towards anyone. And as he goes through this entire qasida, he says at the end that when this individual goes towards the Kaaba, the black stone recognizes the fragrance of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, and before the Imam can kiss the stone falls before Imam Zaynul Abedeen. So you find in this manner the virtues of Imam Zaynul Abedeen are something which are seen from the beginning towards the end of his life. And with that said, we raise our hands and we say, Ya Allah, through the right of Imam Zaynul Abedeen, that wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Jannatul Baqi. Grant us the ziyarah of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. Grant us the shafa of Imam Zaynul Abedeen upon the Day of Judgment. Allow us to see the return of the grandson of Imam Zaynul Abedeen. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم.